Citizen Kane is a very big, very important movie. You might have heard of it at some point. Released in 1941, Orson Welles' debut film has gone on to be cemented as one of the greatest cinematic milestones in the history of the medium. Whilst other films of its era were often seen as well-framed theater, focusing on long shots of their sets and characters, Kane revolutionized film storytelling with its use of cinematography. The way that characters were framed in a shot, the positioning of the characters and their differences in lighting, where the focus of a shot was in order to emphasize a thematic element. These were the concepts that Kane delighted in and toyed with at every corner. It was far from an overnight success, performing modestly at the box office and losing to How Green Was My Valley for Best Picture at that year's Academy Awards. But Citizen Kane's techniques, paired with its engrossing narrative, made it a filmmaker's movie. Kane's cinematographic elements spread through Hollywood until they became second nature to directors, and the film's reputation slowly grew. With enough time, Citizen Kane was seen as the movie that defined what made movies an art form. Listed by the AFI, beloved film critic Roger Ebert, and many, many others as the greatest movie ever made. Until the release of Kochikame the movie in 1999 had a lazy man defuse a bomb using only a primitive Beyblade and supplanted it.
I think I did pretty well under the circumstances.
As video games have become something of a burgeoning art form, it's become quite exciting to think about when games will receive their Citizen Kane, or ask, what is the Citizen Kane of games? What special title will come to define video games as an art form, and get it to be taken seriously in the way that literature, theater, and film have? Unfortunately, what it means to be Citizen Kane kinda gets lost in the shuffle of these talks. Oftentimes, it'll be argued that cinematic experiences that can touch players just like a movie should get this title. It used to be seen as a sort of status symbol, having a franchise or a game get a theatrical release. The idea that it had made it into a more refined medium, and being disappointed by the inevitable conclusion. The product either sucked or was more entertaining than moving. Thus, titles like BIOSHOCK and The Last of Us are oft held up as gaming's Citizen Kane showcase, cinematic experience to rival film, with the added investment of a game's length and player input. And while I think both of those examples, and many like them, are competent in their own way, that ain't it, Chief. While they do take advantage of the gaming medium to push it beyond film, in the same way that Kane used the medium of film to push it beyond theater, the cinematic techniques most commonly relied on are inherent to film before they are to games. It's not inventing the wheel so much as it is borrowing Kane's wheel and changing the treads. Others would argue that subversive work should get the nod, experiences that toy with the expectations of games in the same way that Kane altered the perception of movies. Shadow of the Colossus, Deus Ex, Undertale, Spec Ops: The Line. Art that could only be experienced as a game and elevates the conversation around it. All excellent examples. But I feel as if they're speaking for a conversation that's already been started. Games already had a culture to subvert by the time these titles started talking on them. Others still will say, it's freaking Mario, savior of the industry, doing it again, greatest of all time. And they have a point. Games like Super Mario Bros., Street Fighter II, Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, and the original Dragon Quest revolutionized the way that player interaction with the game world occurred. But these were massive, sweeping titles understood instantly as classics, and tend to focus so strongly on the game side of things that elements from other mediums tend to be left on the wayside. They're the Charlie Chaplins of video games. They're amazing, they show the appeal of video games instantly, but they're not what we're looking for. To me, the Citizen Kane of games is one whose influence has been felt underneath the skin of every game since its release. It's not a game that necessarily had to be on every player's lips, but one influential enough to have devs turn their heads and go, "Oh yeah, that's really cool. I want that in my game." One whose strengths have been expanded upon and celebrated in different ways by other titles, but still stands the test of time. One that does not neglect the strength of other mediums and uses them to hoist itself to greater heights whilst developing its own unique tools. And most importantly, one that defines what it means to excel as a video game, that other mediums could only attempt to replicate, but never truly match. And that game is... Dragon Quest V might seem like an odd pick for this distinguished title. It's not a system seller, it's the 5th game in a series, so it's clearly iterative. And heck, it wasn't even released outside of Japan for 16.5 years after its debut. It didn't invent the Japanese role-playing genre the way that Dragon Quest I did. It didn't save the industry like Super Mario Bros. It's not even the most popular game in its own series. But therein lies its unassuming strength. Dragon Quest V didn't start on Square One, like Donkey Kong, Link, and the Dragon Lord did. There was a foundation for video games, just as there was a foundation for film when Wells took the directing chair. What Yuji Horii, Chunsoft, and Enix were able to create in 1992 was a masterpiece. The culmination of the tone and heart that previous Dragon Quest titles had developed, the ambition of tackling a new system with expanded freedoms in the Super Famicom, and the desire to create a unique experience that would make others truly empathize and smile. But first, a brief history lesson before we dive into the main course. Dragon Quest is the brainchild of Yuji Horii, a freelance writer who was enamored with the burgeoning new art of video games. The man was very technically gifted, getting the attention of up-and-coming games publisher Enix with his submission to their game programming contest, Love Match Tennis. The working relationship between Horii and Enix would continue into his next game, the Portopia Serial Murder Case, an intriguing take on adventure games at the time. Most adventure games moved in a linear fashion, the player needing to type in the right phrase when prompted in order to advance the story. Horii strove to create a game that wasn't so much a simple series of commands and checks, but a conversation between the player and a computer, pre-programming the computer with responses to many of a player's possible actions to toy with the idea of immersion, and featuring a non-linear storyline based off of the player's actions to create a unique story structure. For comparison's sake, Horii was doing this in 1983, a year otherwise headlined by Mario Bros., Dragon's Lair, Punch-Out!, and Donkey Kong Jr. Math. His storytelling was a little bit ahead of the curve. The success of Portopia led to the defining and flourishing of the visual novel genre, and would go on to inspire future legendary directors to enter the industry, most notably Ocarina of Time's Eiji Aonuma and Metal Gear's Hideo Kojima. This career-defining title would then be used by Horii as a stepping stone for the series that would become his legacy, Dragon Quest. Inspired after seeing Wizardry and Ultima during a visit to the Macworld Conference and Expo, Horii wanted to bring the joy of Western RPGs based on the Dungeons & Dragons framework to the average Japanese consumer. Understanding D&D's complex rule sets and requiring hundreds of hours of study and fighting to truly get in would have to go. So Hori focused on a singular element to build off of: escapism. Hori created a system to ensure that the player would grow stronger as the game progressed, learning new spells in a linear fashion to help with exploration and combat. Slimes that were annoyances at the start of the game became jokes to players, as they felt that they were growing truly stronger, immersed in the shoes of the Dragon Warrior's coming-of-age story. The command menu, first developed in Portopia's NES port, became the player's gateway to the world, able to perform whatever action they thought was best at the time. And this immersive little journey was accessible enough, but deep enough to be ravenously gobbled up by the Japanese player base. Dragon Quest invented the Japanese role-playing game as we know it, Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto citing it as the reason why scenario directors gained importance in video games. And sequels proved to introduce a highly customizable party for further player expression, feature a non-linear storyline, and be hard and unplayable, creating the expectation of greatness by the time the 5th game would be released. Although all these titles are excellent and also Dragon Quest II, they more so serve to show Hori's mind and approach as a developer. Hori had spent nearly the past decade trying to make an experience uniquely tied to each player, where an endpoint was in sight, but how the player got there and in what shape they got there was anyone's guess. This is a man who would write tragedy and a deep motivation for his serial killer 1 minute, and then turn around to make a joke about a puff-puff massage from a busty female and subverting that at every turn the next. And after multiple hyper-successful titles in Japan, here he was with the expanded capabilities of the Super Famicom, ready to break past the systems he dedicated himself to using on the classic Famicom, and show absolutely what he could do. Improvements to the Dragon Quest formula were made across the board. Towns becoming more robust, locations more imaginative, battles more expansive and snappy. Gambling minigames were expanded to include horse races featuring slimes. An entire optional dungeon was dedicated to beating Estark at his full power, the Satan equivalent of the Dragon Quest universe, who was beaten in a weakened state in Dragon Quest IV. The entire series was bigger and better than ever, and willing to pay homage to all the greatness that had come before. But of course, Hori's strength comes in his scenario direction, and that's the crux of Dragon Quest V's mystique. For his time, Hori was absolutely unparalleled at marrying the gameplay of his title to the guiding psychological and emotional principles he wanted to instill, and Dragon Quest V was to be his masterwork. From this point onward, we're going to be flinging spoilers around like we're running out of time. So I do implore you to pause and play the game if any single one hooks you, as I feel that in its scenario, Dragon Quest V becomes legendary. More than any other game, Dragon Quest V is the story of the player who would become the hero. After inputting their name, the player is thrown directly into the plot, seeing a warrior king pace around his castle as the clock ticks forward. A baby's cry is heard, and he's ushered upstairs, able to see a newborn baby boy in the arms of his loving wife. Though the king suggests a name paying tribute to his lovely wife, Mada, she has a different name in mind: the player's. In this way, the player is able to witness their own birth into the world of Dragon Quest, and the identity they'll adopt for the game's story. Mada falls ill immediately after, and the screen fades to black, the player awakening on a boat as a 6-year-old child. Their father laughs off thoughts of him as a king as a silly dream, and from there, you start your journey. And as a 6-year-old whacking monsters with a stick, you're pretty powerless. Daddy Pancraz needing to help you keep your pitiful health up and get you to fight your first slime. And while they're still at the absolute bottom of the barrel, the player goes on cute little adventures, steadily growing more powerful. They team up with a little girl to hunt ghosts in order to save a cat from some bullies, become best friends with this semi-feral kitty, go to the land of fairies to save it from a snow queen, all quests with an air of whimsy and playfulness. Heck, you can't even die here, the player just waking up outside of a dungeon if they get into trouble. Everything in this part of the story is framed like a playground, a child discovering the world around them, barely able to read but pressing forward with wide-eyed wonder. It's the pure escapist fun that you get from playing games as a kid, translated into the video game itself. And then this guy shows up and ruins everything. In the player's third major adventure, the prince of a small kingdom is kidnapped by this bishop and his minions, Khan the Knight and Scion the Rook. With their dad by their side, the player is able to easily dispatch everything in their path, until Pankraz needs to hold off a wave of monsters, ordering the children to escape. The player has grown strong enough to handle themselves by this point, and just before they taste freedom and save the day, Bishop Lodja steps in their path, toying with the children before wiping them out. But when all seems lost, in comes Papa, easily dispatching the knight and rook before charging forth to capture the bishop. But then, your king is put into check himself. Lodja grabs the player and threatens to kill them unless Pankraz throws down his weapon and accepts his fate. And Pankraz, unable to even think about losing his son, obeys. The game shifts to a battle screen, Pankraz versus a rallying Khan and Scion, and the player has to watch as their father, the powerful warrior who could get them through any fight, is slowly whittled down. Pankraz begs for his son to live, to seek out their mother in his stead, as the bosses reduce his health to nothing. And then, Lodja kills a 6-year-old child's dad in front of their very eyes. Because the player was too weak, their father died, and Lodja enslaves them, reducing them to nothing. End Act 1. Loss was not something strongly explored in games to this point. Normally, the only characters that would die either perished before the game started, were bad guys, or were Ryu Hayabusa's dad and did both somehow. If a character that the player got to know as a friend died, it was often at the climax of a story, like Floyd the Robot, or were interchangeable main characters serving as lives, like Sweet Home or Maniac Mansion. Pankraz isn't even the first RPG hero to die in combat, with both Dragon Quest III's Ortega and Final Fantasy IV's Tella buying the farm in their own feudal efforts. But these moments are played for spectacle, to show either the power of their respective villains, or how strong the hero has become compared to the Fallen. Pankraz, however? Pankraz kept you alive on your first journey home. He's by far the strongest character in the world you know, a fact made abundantly clear by just how long it takes for Khan and Scion to chip away at him whilst he's defenseless. The player doesn't just lose a character in Pankraz, they lose the most valuable party member they've ever had. They lose their safety net. They lose their dad. In a combination of mechanical and emotional loss, Pankraz's death just hits harder than the competition. You'd have to lose someone you've carried with you for even longer, a loved one you chose to keep close, to exceed this feeling of loss. Don't worry, we'll get there. 10 years pass, the hero growing into an able-bodied young man, forced day and night to labor in building the great temple of Crocodilopolis atop the highest peak in the world. After showing that they still have a spark of justice inside of them, Through an escape equal parts lucky and improvised, the hero is free to explore the world below. They have nothing. Just a vague direction as to where their home is, a kingdom to check in on, one friend who's not even good at fighting, and the quest to find their mother. And it's here, with the world open before them, that the game introduces its major gameplay hook: monster recruitment. While normal, story-based party members are still part of Dragon Quest V's plot, they tend to enter and leave the party as they please, story events whisking them somewhere else. After defeating certain enemies, the player has a chance of impressing one of their slain foes, the monster approaching after the fight and asking to join their party. These generic enemies can then be made into full-fledged party members, sticking with the player for the rest of the game. Other titles had played with the idea of monster recruitment before. Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga, and later Shin Megami Tensei, allowing players to negotiate with demons to recruit them. But these recruits were rigid, static members that needed to be fused together in order to be made better. There's no real growth, just take one and move on to the next. Dragon Quest V's monsters level up, learn new spells, and function as any fully fledged party member would. With the game having 40 different recruitable species and one special one stacked on top of the party members the game naturally rotates in and out of the player's control, an unprecedented level of flexibility is available to players. Every player's party is their own. How much effort they want to spend into trying to make a friend with an enemy type that looked cool is their decision, and no two playthroughs, even from players who like the same kind of monsters, would be identical. And for the exceptionally dedicated, this created a new goal. Figure out just what species you can recruit, complete the bestiary, and try out everything the game has to offer. Other games may have had their secrets, but Dragon Quest V was less concerned with players delving into every corner of the world, and more on presenting players with an open challenge. Sometimes, all you need is a codex to make a player feel in their heart that they gotta catch 'em all. After gathering friends and perhaps learning the joys of gambling, the player progresses to their hometown, ruined beyond repair because Lodja is nothing if not petty. Exploring the tattered remains of their home, they venture forth into a cave that their father favored, discovering that he was harboring a weapon of legend, the Zenithian sword. Pancraz left his son a letter, knowing that he might one day be slain, asking his boy to gather the sacred pieces of the Zenithian equipment and find the legendary hero who can wear them, for they will be the key to the world's safety and to finding his mother. And when the player tries to equip this blade, their character is sapped of all strength, too tired to even lift it. In Dragon Quest V, you do not play as the hero. You're just you. With the grandeur of the Chosen One narrative not only stripped away, but actively excluding you from it, DQ5 allows you to play a far more personal story. The stakes still involve the fate of the world, sure, just like any other high fantasy adventure, but you're not the great hero who's needed to save it. You're inheriting the role of the wise sage, collecting the artifacts and knowledge of the world in order to guide the true hero, whoever they may be. And yet, the story does not lose its gravitas from this. You have a personal quest to fulfill and an ugly bishop to capture after all, and not having the excuse of being a legendary hero chosen by destiny makes it all the more challenging and enjoyable to overcome. Your journey becomes a lot more experimental and driven by you, just figuring out what you think will be useful for your quest. You effectively invent the spell Zoom for use by humans through an old man in a weird house, find and tame the kitten you befriended a decade ago, grown into a full saber-toothed tiger, even save an entire kingdom, just journeying the world, exploring it all at your own pace, recruiting monsters and growing stronger with only an inclination of where to go. And after enjoying your personal quest, your newfound freedom, your desire to explore this world, the game finally strikes at the heart of the journey it's been taking you on.
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
You enter the town of Mostroferrato after hearing word that the Zenithian shield has come under the ownership of Rodrigo Briscoletti, the wealthiest man in town. Upon their arrival, the player will be greeted by a runaway dog, who immediately takes a liking to them as their owner runs up behind it. The young lady who owns the dog is revealed to be Nera, daughter of Rodrigo, and, if you're playing a remake, the first girl you met way back at the start of the game. She very quickly takes a liking to you as well. But not so fast, my friend! Rodrigo will only give the Zenithian shield, heirloom of his family, to the man who marries his daughter. And while you're certainly a healthy-looking bit of lasagna, he's gotta test your passione and your bravery. He's great. I love him. Thus, Rodrigo shall only allow a man to marry Nera if you can obtain 2 precious rings, the Circle of Fire and the Circle of Water, from within treacherous labyrinths to use as your wedding bands. This scares off almost all of the potential suitors. And while one childhood friend of Nera's tries for the Circle of Fire, his name is Crispin Burns, and he went inside of a volcano. You weren't destined for greatness, buddy. The player is able to struggle to obtain the Circle of Fire on their own, but during the player's quest for the Circle of Water, they meet an old friend, Bianca, the girl they went ghostbusting with as a child. Bianca quickly joins the player's party, helping them through the dangerous Cataract Caves, reminiscing on their time together as kids and how much fun they're having together now. It's only after you obtain the Circle of Water that Bianca grows quiet, realizing it's effectively a wedding ring meant for someone else, asking to accompany you back to Mostroferrato. Once you return, Rodrigo is both incredibly impressed and overjoyed, Nera silently approving as well. However, Nera notices the girl you've brought with you and her solemn expression, asking if she might harbor feelings for you. Sensing the purity and kindness in his daughter's heart, Rodrigo makes you an offer. Decide who you want to wed, Bianca or Nera. Both are infatuated with you. Both are kind-hearted young women, and no matter what your decision, Rodrigo will both accept it and finance your wedding. In one of the most poignant scenes of the era, the player wakes up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, and they simply wander Mostroferrato during the night, the townspeople all abuzz of the coming wedding, wondering who you're going to marry, supporting the player no matter who they choose to spend the rest of their life with, Nera or Bianca.
A one-woman man's what I wanna be. Stay by her side so faithfully. I would if I could, but it's just no good. 'Cause there's 2 perfect girls for me.
There is no right answer to this. No matter who the player chooses, they obtain the Zenithian shield and a yacht to continue their journey in. Functionally, from a narrative perspective, the choice between Bianca and Nera means very little. And they learn the same spells from a gameplay perspective, Bianca just getting the combat spells more quickly and Nera excelling in support. However, there's no moment that the game gives more weight to than this, and no moment is remembered as passionately by its fanbase. Whoever you choose is your wife. She stays with you for the remainder of the game and will support and love you until the very end, overjoyed to be by your side. This simple moment, having no practical game benefits, was given a weight greater than any boss fight, secret dungeon, or even the death of Pancraz. All other Dragon Quest games feature subtitles relating to their grand journey or the heroic destiny of its party, but this singular moment is important enough to come to title and define the entire game. Nothing is more important than the hand of the heavenly bride. And I feel like that's something that's carried over into many, many other titles. The player having a choice for their own personal satisfaction. Final Fantasy VII features the ability to date Tifa, Aerith, Yuffie, or Barrett, depending on how the player chooses to react to them through the game. Metal Gear Solid features 2 different endings depending on how the player reacts to a minigame, with the life of Snake's love interest on the line. The Persona series features multiple girls that the player can date, learning their doubts and trying to help them through their struggles. Heck, even dating sims as a whole evolved after 1992, going from pursuing a single girl through a series of difficult text adventure prompts to having a robust selection of girls to pursue. It's hard for me to argue against the thought that one of the largest titles in all of Japan, championing the idea that romance and player choice could both sell and define a game, didn't have an impact on this. And every game that titles like these inspired ultimately have Bianca and Nera to thank. In my mind, this is where the element of player choice transformed from a novelty into something defining of games as a whole. And the thought of interaction with an art form evolving from a place of love, however simple it may be, well, that's a thought I'll hold and cherish. And even then, after creating a moment that would define a generation of gamers, Dragon Quest V is not satisfied. It helped bring out a new form of appreciation, and it was going to twist and toy with players' emotions every step of the way from then on. The game continues after your marriage, crossing the world to continue gathering the Zenithian equipment and find the player's mother, until Queen Cleopatra reveals your family's great secret. Pancraz was once ruler of the Kingdom of Gotha, but surrendered his throne after his wife was kidnapped by demons. You may not be the hero, but you are the lost prince of a kingdom to the east, with friends and familial connections waiting to help you on your personal quest. The player continues forward until eventually, reaching a mountain pass to Gotha, their wife collapses. Though both she and the doctor examining her insist that nothing is wrong, merely exhaustion, it's weird for this moment to be pointed out and interrupt the story. After trekking through the remaining dungeon and getting an audience with Gotha's current king, your wife faints again. Rushing her to a bed, the nearby clergy observes you, and instead of delivering bad news, congratulates you. Your wife is several months pregnant, never wanting to show it or leave your side until her body rendered her completely unable to do so. Your quest became theirs, and they loved being a part of it, and would devote themselves now to making sure that your child was born healthy. After delving into one more dungeon to prove yourself as Gotha's king, the player returns to their wife suddenly going into labor. In a parallel to the beginning of the game, you wait in your castle, pacing, now waiting for the birth of your own children. And with a baby's cry, you rush upstairs to find your wife having given birth to twins, letting you name them just as you were named at the very beginning. It's a touching epilogue, a perfect showing of just how your relationship developed and all the care and love to emerge from it. Your personal quest is over. You're a husband, a father. You're happy. Then Logic kidnaps your wife in the middle of the night. You hunt him down, uncovering corruption within your own cabinet, scaling a tower, leaving your newborn children in the hands of your father's most loyal retainer in a single-minded pursuit to save your wife. And atop the tower, Khan, the most burly of your father's murderers, awaits, ready to finish off Pankraz's brood once and for all. He summons up a nearly invincible barrier, planning to beat down the player in front of their wife just like he beat up dear old Daddy years ago.
Daddy screamed real good before he died.
But your wife, even in her captive state, refuses to not support you, a beam of light emerging from her and dissipating the barrier. With the aid of your love, you slay the horse demon, saving your wife and avenging your father in one fell swoop. But Khan realizes something. Only the power of legend, the blood of the Zenithians, could dispel the magic barrier Lodja bestowed upon him. Though the legendary hero did not yet exist, with the blood of a Zenithian, your child could grow into being the legendary hero. Not knowing that they've already been born, with his dying breath, Khan lets out a horrible shriek, doing all he can to hurt you one last time. In remakes of Dragon Quest V, he calls out to Lodja to finish you off, and in the original, he casts a curse with the last of his life. But the result is the same either way. The fiends turn the player and their wife into stone statues, fully conscious of the world around them, but unable to do anything but look and listen to the world beyond. The demons just leave you there, in an abandoned tower full of monsters, sure that no one would ever tread there. We cut back to the castle, where your dutiful retainer comforts your now crying newborns, promising that soon, very soon, their mommy and daddy will come home. Eventually, your statues are found by treasure hunters, who transport the both of you to an auction site. There, you're sold off, individually, watching a bidding sequence slowly, agonizingly play out until you're bought, dragged helplessly away from your wife. And then, we see where the player ends up, in the garden of a wealthy recluse, brought to bring good luck to his newborn child. And slowly, we see time pass as the player simply watches someone else's child grow up. The joys that this family goes through together, knowing that their wife is suffering in equal measure and that they're missing out on having the same experience with their own children. The player built themselves a family from nothing, and once again, everything is taken away. It is cruel. It is tragic. It is brilliant. The game's third act follows the player's children coming to their aid, freeing them from their stone prison. The player's son, indeed, has the blood of the legendary hero, and it's up to the newly freed player to guide him, just as Pankraz did with them. The final act of Dragon Quest V is the player's victory lap. Their path is clear: find and rescue their bride, reunite their family, and save the world. It's got its own twists and turns, seeing how the world changes with 2 decades of in-game time, and including a really interesting bit of time travel. But the final stretch serves more to give the player closure. After having everything be stripped away from them twice, after all they've built up and the bonds they've forged, they can just play Dragon Quest now. Dive into dungeons, create their perfect endgame team, kill King K. Rool 2 years before Donkey Kong Country, and lay waste to Lodja's forces once and for all. The player absolutely earns their happy ending. What Dragon Quest V manages to accomplish is absolutely astounding. Not just for a game released in 1992, but for what it was and what it meant to gaming as a whole. Dragon Quest was massive in Japan. 5 didn't need to be anything more than a simple sequel building a little bit on the previous iteration. Just add a little extra for the new console generation. It still would have sold like hotcakes. Any one of Dragon Quest V's elements, its story, its tragedy, its marriage aspect, its monster recruitment, would have set it apart as a video game. and as a worthy entry into the franchise. But instead, all of these ideas were taken, and rather than just hodgepodging them together, they were weaved and interconnected so carefully and neatly to create a different level of player expression and interaction than the world had seen before. Dragon Quest V wasn't a game that wanted its players to talk about how cool the story beats and characters were, or how good they were at it to friends and how high their level was. It was a deeply personal experience. Every player had their wife, their journey, could see what monsters they brought with them and which ones lasted as the game went on. It was something wonderful to experience, and something equally wonderful to share with others, to see what they think and what choices they made. Dragon Quest V wasn't another piece of media or just another game. It was your story. It was something no film or any other kind of media for that matter could replicate in the same way. And I know that for a fact, because they tried, and they failed. Dragon Quest: Your Story is a feature-length animated film released in 2019, retelling the events of Dragon Quest V. If you'd like to see it for yourself without spoilers, know that I sincerely recommend roughly the first 50 minutes of it, but also feel free to know that it's a bad adaptation and just skip to this timestamp. Your Story is an utterly gorgeous spectacle, using some of the best CG animation I've ever seen to this date. Its director and writer, Takashi Yamazaki, is an expert in the field of adaptation, creating the award-winning Always Sunset on 3rd Street, based on the manga of the same name, the theatrical adaptation of Parasite, and the blockbuster Stand By Me Doraemon, which was second in the Japanese box office only to a little-known film named Frozen during the year of its release. And it's clear from the opening of the film that Yamazaki knows his stuff. The child section is truncated into practically a recap, shown as highly stylized game footage before bringing out the gorgeous animation for its most stunning sequence, Pancraz's death. The escape from Crocodilopolis is treated as a comedic, almost buddy movie-like blundering. Monster recruitment is neatly limited to just Saber and an adorably marketable slime, and the movie cleverly weaves in late-game favorites like Dr. Agon into the second act to keep the pacing snappier for that 100-minute runtime. Even the courtship of Nera and Bianca, the crux of the game's emotional resonance, is done brilliantly. The Circle of Fire quest is cut completely, Bianca instead accompanying and bantering with the hero as they combat late-game favorite Bjorn the Behemoth. The whole thing is framed as Bianca trying to help her old friend get the nerve to propose to the most beautiful girl he's ever seen and aid him every step on the way of his journey, only to slowly realize that perhaps she's the one who wants to be proposed to. The lonely night of soul-searching before the decision is framed as a dream sequence, menus from Dragon Quest appearing to represent the different choices in a way that's as nostalgic as it is beautiful. And the overall resolution to the arc, the hero choosing Bianca, known audience favorite, is done in a way that's in service to both of the girls as characters that, honestly, is stronger than the game itself. The start of this movie is an absolute joy for anyone who's played Dragon Quest V. Look at Rodrigo, I love this man! However, Your Story does live in the shadow of its game counterpart. Even though it's an incredibly fun adventure movie with stunning visuals, the most it can do is pay homage to its source material and tell its story in a new way. The hero of Your Story is named Luca, to distance him from being the audience insert, and is given a more bumbling, unsure, awkward personality that you might attribute more to a teenage anime protagonist than a slate for the viewer to imprint on. The visual stylings of Dragon Quest lend themselves to a lot of bounce and energy that's played with a lot, but loses the seriousness that comes from in-battle decision-making and quiet moments of reflection. What your story does in place of that is show what Dragon Quest V would have looked like in the minds of players, bringing the sprites to life so vividly that it feels like a nostalgic viewer's imagination has come to life, fully realized on the big screen. It's that feeling of making it that films like Super Mario Bros. So desperately wanted to capture. But it is a feeling directly related to how much the viewer cares about Dragon Quest V going in. The plot is just too big and isn't given enough time for it to resonate like the game did. Separated from nostalgia, it's a beautiful and charming little romp that misses the substance of what makes the game so great. And the crazy part is, Yamazaki knows this and tries to address it. The third act of the film, post-petrification, truly feels like a formality. Hit all the story beats necessary to complete DQ5's story, but robbed of the immense personal relief that comes from the player finally getting their heroic crescendo. The final battle takes place atop Crocodilopolis, Laja unleashing all he has, cool monster designs coming out of the woodwork, all of Luca's friends arriving for a big, epic, grand-scale final battle. It's certainly a spectacle, but it's little more than that. The expected ending of an action piece. With his final breath, Laja summons his true lord, Grandmaster NIMZO, the final boss of Dragon Quest V. Only instead of King Piccolo stepping out of the portal, this black scrawl Jiren-looking dude shows up, freezing the world around Luca. He reveals himself as a virus, created by an exceptionally bored genius programmer and hidden into the code of this game's final boss. The entire movie was just a game, a super detailed VR simulation of Dragon Quest V being played by a lonely 30-something named Luca with intense nostalgia for their favorite DQ. And this virus is here to end it, right at the climax, to destroy the world this player held dear, to give the player one specific message from its creator. Grow up, loser.
Grow up, loser.
However, the player refuses to give in, powered by the memories of playing the game as a child and how the game has grown up with him. He refuses to accept that games are just silly things. Those memories are not things to be bullied or erased. They're things to strengthen you, as he cries for his gamer heart to rise up. His passion is so great that his slime companion remembers that it is an antibody programmed into the game to defeat viruses, and in the voice of Steve Bloom, transforms into a sword to help the hero slay the evil computer virus, about to destroy the precious world of Dragon Quest, nay, video games as a whole!
You must complete your adventure!
That's the plot. That's the ending. Yeah. Dragon Quest, your story, sets out to capture the heart of the game. That this is a personal experience for players, one to take with them and cherish. Its attempts are bold, ambitious, and happen to fail on every level. While Dragon Quest V captured its spirit through hours of bonding with the player, through presenting them with this wonderful journey, your story attempts to turn it into a commentary on video games as a whole through the lens of Dragon Quest V as a meaningful adventure. What the film doesn't seem to realize is that not only does it sacrifice the entire narrative it built up as an action flick to get to this point, isolating basically everyone who never played Dragon Quest V, but that the point it's trying to make has already been made and been made better by DQ5 itself. What's trying to be a reaffirmation and validation of the feelings that Dragon Quest provides comes off as a whiny shriek of insecurity about the writer's own passion for their work. Your story was never going to capture the magic of Dragon Quest, just as adapting Citizen Kane into a novel would never capture the greatness of that film. The way that it was made to be experienced was so intricate, played so well on the expectations built up through the art form preceding it and in the techniques used, that it could never be adapted as anything more than a celebration of the original's greatness. Dragon Quest V isn't my favorite video game. Heck, it's not even my favorite Super Famicom RPG that didn't get localized for the Super Nintendo. Citizen Kane isn't my favorite film of its era. I have a very strong soft spot for Chaplin's The Great Dictator, but I feel both endure far past their merits as purely a game or a movie. Each was pushed by its creator to go beyond what was seen as possible for the time, creating resonant and emotive pieces for both their consumers and their fellow creators. It is impossible to measure Citizen Kane's impact, only to know that it is a wonderful, transformative piece of media that caused future works to step up their games. In that regard, Hori stands shoulder to shoulder with Wells. Both Kane and DQ5 set up similar stories, deep, personal dives into the entirety of a character's life that hadn't been done in either medium before. But DQ5 sets out to be more than just a contemporary. Whilst its influence on certain games is obvious, there are still dozens more that the behemoth release of DQ5 assuredly inspired. And those who further specialized its concepts and made titles inspired by its fans still have Slime to thank. I know that there are other answers to the question of what is the Citizen Kane of games, and that a medium doesn't necessarily need a Citizen Kane, or a central work to point back on as the important one, but by looking at these titles that went the extra mile, that define what it is to be a video game and inspire hundreds more stories to be told by its example, I think we strengthen our medium's identity even further. If you have a Citizen Kane of games, a shining gem that you feel had inspired both the industry and yourself, I would love to hear it. After enough thought and study, this is my answer, but I'm glad to hear others. Artistic achievement is a special thing, but one that only shines greatest when shared by others. Due to its lack of localization until its DS remake, Dragon Quest V never got the chance to have this impact on and personal connection with the West's player base that it likely deserved. And I think that's why it's all the more important to praise all of the incredible things that the game both did and made possible. That's why I'll gladly talk for far too long about why Dragon Quest V is the Citizen Kane of video games. Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Congrats, you're looking great. Normally I wouldn't talk over the credits, but Dragon Quest music copyright terrifies me, so there you go. Just spinning wheels, killing time. But really, thank you so much for hearing this one out. This vid's been a long time in the making. Had a lot of revisions and additions, and I'm really proud of what we were able to make here. If you'd like to support the channel, consider subbing or joining us at twitch.tv/designing4, or looking at our Patreon and be listed amongst the fine folks you see on screen now. Or just, share the video around, have a comment, whatever's good for you. Honestly, we just love talking about video games and want to keep doing so for as long as possible. It's only because of support and viewership that we've been able to keep going. Really hope you enjoyed, and if you didn't, I at least respect your moxie for getting this far into the video. Dang. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you all next time, guys. Deborah.